the name of that Sunday?
Yeah.
Palm Sunday, yeah. I thought you remembered. On Palm Sunday, Jesus rode into town on a donkey that nobody had ever ridden on before. Did it try to buck him off?
No.
No, because what could Jesus do? Talk to them. He
Animals.
could talk to the animals and they weren't afraid of him. So he rode into Jerusalem and everybody was all happy that day and they had palm branches and what were they doing?
Waving them.
Waving them and they were saying,
Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
Oh, kiss your brain, you're so smart. Next.
Look at the yellow one. The yellow one.
Let's see,
Yellow.
this one.
No. The purple. It's the purple. It's the cup.
It's the cup. The disciples and Jesus
The Last Supper.
had the Last Supper. It was a special dinner that they had together, and they were celebrating what? Starts with P.
Passover.
Passover. Oh, let's see if we remember what happened with Passover. A long, long time before that, the Israelites were living in another country called Egypt, and there was a king, and what was he called?
Pharaoh.
Pharaoh. Was Pharaoh a good guy or a bad guy?
Bad guy.
He was a bad guy. There were a lot of pharaohs that were bad guys. A long time before that, there was a good pharaoh when Joseph was there. But after Joseph was gone, there was a pharaoh that didn't know about Joseph, and he made the Israelites slaves. They had to work all the time and didn't get paid, did they? And so he was really mean to them, and he was going to kill the baby boys. But there was a lady named Jochebed, and Jochebed had a beautiful baby boy named Moses. And what did she hide him in? A basket, and she put him in a lake or a river? A river, and what did Miss Bennett tell you? He lived in that river. Crocodiles! There were scary crocodiles living in the Nile River, but did God let the crocodiles eat Moses? No, because what did he have for Moses? A special plan for Moses. And so Moses was floating in his basket, and his sister Miriam was watching to see what would happen because Jochebed just couldn't bring herself to watch. And he floated up to the palace. And who was there? No, Jochebed did come later, but who was there? The princess was there, and she heard Moses crying, and she felt so sorry for him, and she adopted him, and he got to grow up in the palace just like a prince. Well, one day he got kind of sad that the Israelites were being mistreated, and so he left. He did something kind of bad, and he had to leave Egypt. And while he was out in the desert, he met a man named Jethro, and Jethro had a beautiful daughter, and Moses married her, and they had kids. And they had a lot of sheep. Now, was God's special plan for Moses to just be a shepherd? No, there's nothing wrong with being a shepherd, but that wasn't God's plan for him. So he was out in the desert one day, and he saw something very strange. What was it?
A fire.
A bush was on fire. Was it burning up? No. Moses went over to see what was going on, and he heard a voice. What did the voice say?
Moses.
Who was talking to him? God was talking to Moses, and he said, what? He told him to take something off. What did he tell him to take off? His sandals, because the ground was holy ground. And he said, Moses, I have seen the Israelites and how mean Pharaoh's been to them. And I want you to go and tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And Moses said, God, I can't do that because I don't talk very well. Remember I told you that Moses had a hard time when he got upset. He couldn't get his, he would go, but. That's probably what he said to God. But I can't. So God said, well, your brother Aaron, he can go with you because he's really good at talking. So they went to see Pharaoh, and he said, Pharaoh, God said, let my people go. And Pharaoh said, no. So Moses said, well, look what God can do. And what did Moses have in his hand?
The staff.
The staff. And he threw it down, and what happened? It turned into a snake. And when he picked it up, what happened?
Staff.
It's turned into a staff again. Well, the magicians from Egypt, they turned their staffs into snakes too. But what did Moses' snake do? Ate their snakes. Yes, that was pretty gross. Anyway, so he told Pharaoh, God is going to send some plagues on you because you won't obey God. And so he took his staff and put it in the Nile River, and what happened? It turned into blood, and all the fish died, and it was smelly and gross. And he said, Pharaoh, God says, let my people go. And Pharaoh said, no. So then, what happened? There were a bunch of things that hopped. Frogs. Where were the frogs? Everywhere. They were in the bathtub. They were in the bed. They were in the kitchen. They were everywhere. And Pharaoh called Moses back, and he said, if you'll get rid of the frogs, I'll let the people go tomorrow. If I was Pharaoh, I would have been like, don't wait till tomorrow, get out of here. But he went back the next day, and all the frogs had died, and Pharaoh changed his mind again, and Moses said, God said, let my people go, and he said, no! So 8 more times there were plagues. There were bad storms. They got sores on their body. There were bugs. It was gross. Everywhere. And he still wouldn't let people go. So Moses came back the last time and said, the last plague is coming tonight, and every Egyptian firstborn son was going to what? Die. But God told Moses to tell the Israelites to mark their houses, and that the angel of death would not bother them. What did they have to mark their houses with? The blood of a lamb. They had to put it on the door. And when the death angel came, what did he do? He passed over their house, and that's why they call it Passover. Now, while Jesus and his disciples were celebrating Passover, something really sad happened. Well, that's coming, but Jesus had a friend. Jesus had a friend named Judas, and what did Judas do? He betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, and he was going to tell the guards where Jesus was, wasn't he? He was so sad. Now, that night, Jesus and his disciples went to the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus was what? Praying. And what were his friends doing? They were sleeping, and they were so tired. And it made Jesus sad because he knew what was going to happen to him. And he tried to wake them up, and they would wake up for a minute, and then they would go back to sleep. And then Jesus said, get up. The soldiers are coming. And they came. And how did Judas tell them which one was Jesus?
Kiss.
He did. He kissed him on his cheek. Was that not so sad? It was so sad. So they took Jesus to the high priest house.
Which is the king.
And they locked him up. Remember I told you? And Peter came, and they asked Peter 3 times, weren't you with Jesus? And what did Peter say? No. And then what crowed? The rooster crowed. And Jesus told him that he was going to do that. And Peter was really, really sad. But later on, Jesus and Peter, they did make up. So that was the good thing. Now, the soldiers were really mean to Jesus. Remember I told you? And they hit him with something. What do you remember what I told you? They hit him with a whip. That's what's in that one.
A whip and Bennett.
And then let me see what's in this one.
What is that?
They put the crown of thorns on his head. Yes, they did. They put the thing on his head. Now listen. Listen up, friends. Eyes on this. 1, 2, 3. Eyes on me. Whoa. I like how Maverick's listening to me. I really do like that. He's listening. He's doing his job. They nailed Jesus to the cross in his hands, in his feet. Remember I told you about that. And the mean soldiers, they did something. They had a game that they played. Remember what I told you? The king Antonia fortress is, where Pilate was with Jesus. Here it is. Y'all can sit on the bottom so you can see. Remember I told you that Miss Bennett saw the King's game in the dirt, in the stone at the Antonia fortress. It's still there. The soldiers would roll the dice, and whoever won, what did they keep? They kept Jesus' clothes. And Miss Bennett's gonna try real hard not to cry. Do you remember who I told you made the garment that they didn't want to tear in pieces? Who made the garment for Jesus that they took? Mary, his mother, made it for him, yes. At Jewish boys, their mothers would make them a garment. And
Are you trying not to cry?
I'm trying really hard not to cry. And when Jesus was on the cross, one of the mean soldiers, what did they do?
They stabbed him.
They did stab him. But did they break any of Jesus' bones?
No.
No, they did not break any of Jesus' bones. Now, Jesus, when he was on the cross and died, he said, "It is finished," and he died. And then there was a very special man, he had the same name as Jesus' daddy, but it wasn't Jesus' daddy. Do you remember what his name was? Joseph of Arimathea. He went to Pilate, and remember I told you he was very brave, because people were afraid then that they might get killed too if they said they were with Jesus. But Joseph was very wealthy, and he was very important. And he went to Pilate and asked Pilate, could he take Jesus' body down, and he was going to do what with it? Wrap it up. And he had a friend, and they went and he said he would let him. So he had a friend named Nicodemus, and they went and took Jesus down, and they wrapped him up as best they could. And Joseph had a tomb that was very expensive. And let me ask you this. Did they bury people under the ground or in a cave? In a cave. So they wrapped Jesus up and put him in the tomb, and then they rolled something in front of it. They rolled a great big stone. We got a picture of it up there. They rolled a great big stone, because what would happen to you when you died? Yeah, you would start stinking. So they would roll the stone in front of the tomb. Now, that was on Friday morning, and on Saturday, nobody could do anything because it was a Sabbath. Remember I told you they couldn't work or anything. They still can't. If you go to Israel, they don't do any work on Saturday. But then the Pilate had 2 soldiers go stand beside the tomb, because they didn't want anybody to steal Jesus and say that he had risen from the dead, because he heard he said he was going to do it. So they put the soldiers there, those mean soldiers, and what started happening? The ground started to shake, and the soldiers were looking at each other like, what is happening? And all of a sudden there was a great big light, and what happened? The angel rolled the stone away and then did what? Sat on it. Good, William. He sat up on it. And what did those big, bad, mean soldiers do?
They fainted.
They fainted. They weren't so big and bad anymore, were they? And they looked inside the tomb. What was there?
Nothing.
Nothing, because it was what? Empty. Now, the cloth that Jesus was wrapped up in, what was it all just thrown in the floor? No, what was it? It was all folded up nice and neat, because does Jesus leave a mess anywhere? No, he doesn't. Well, early that morning, his friend Mary, came to the tomb, and she looked. There were no soldiers, because the soldiers ran away, because they thought they were in bad trouble. She looked in the tomb and saw that it was empty, and somebody was walking behind her, and she thought it was the gardener, and she was what? Crying. And she said, oh, please, if you took Jesus away, tell me and I'll go get him. And what did he say? Mary. And then she knew what?
Real well.
Jesus, because nobody said her name like that, right? So she knew it was Jesus, and he said, go tell my disciples that I've risen from the dead and that they're going to get to see me. So she went and told the disciples, and they didn't believe her, did they? But Peter and John, what did they do?
Run.
They ran to the tomb. Who got there first? John, because he was what? He was the youngest, and he could run faster than Peter. Because what I tell you about Peter, he was probably big and maybe not fat, but he was a big guy. So John, in the Bible, when John tells us that story in the Bible, he always made a point of saying,